The world just watched the opening scene of a blockbuster it never wanted. In a coordinated pre-dawn strike dubbed Operation Epic Fury, U.S. and Israeli forces successfully targeted and killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in Tehran early this morning, March 8, 2026. In immediate retaliation, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has announced a full closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The global oil market's reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Brent crude futures skyrocketed past $140 a barrel in early trading, a staggering 120% surge from prices just last week. Let's be real. This is the POV from the Oval Office that the so-called experts in the foreign policy blob have been gaslighting you about for years. President Trump's unambiguous, strong stance, a refusal to tolerate what he called the world's leading state sponsor of terror, set this stage. According to a Pentagon statement read at 5:17 a.m. Eastern Time, the operation was a decisive act of national defense following what U.S. intelligence cited as imminent and specific threats to American personnel and interests across the Middle East. The message was delivered not with a diplomatic cable, but with a Hellfire missile. Talk about a plot twist. Here's the fast version of how we got here. For 10 days, tensions have been at a boiling point following a series of escalatory incidents. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet had been on its highest alert level in the Persian Gulf. Israeli intelligence, according to sources who spoke to Reuters, provided what was described as irrefutable, time-sensitive targeting data. The joint operation involved stealth aircraft and long-range precision munitions. Iranian state media, in a stunned broadcast, confirmed the supreme leader's death and declared the action a declaration of war against the Islamic world. Now, what everyone is missing while they clutch their pearls is the economic shockwave that just hit your wallet. That $140 per barrel price isn't an abstract number. According to analysts at Goldman Sachs cited by CNBC, if the strait closure holds for more than 72 hours, we are looking at prices potentially spiking to $180. Translation: American gas prices could reach between $7 and $9 per gallon within a month. So for all the Karens whining about escalation, maybe ask how you'll afford to drive your SUV to the next protest. The strategic play here is as direct as it gets. By taking out the regime's central pillar, the U.S.-Israel alliance aimed for a decapitation strike to cripple command and control. A senior White House official, speaking on background, told Fox News, the objective was to remove the architect of decades of terrorism and regional instability in one fell swoop. The era of appeasement is over. But Iran's response, shutting down the choke point for 20% of the world's oil, shows they're playing a different game. It's not just a military counterpunch, it's an economic siege on the global economy. Real talk, the global security architecture just got smashed. Key U.S. allies in Europe and Asia, according to diplomatic cables seen by the BBC, are, in a state of panic, urgently convening emergency NATO and UN Security Council sessions. Meanwhile, Russia and China have already condemned the strike as an illegal and provocative act of aggression. The stage isn't just set for a regional conflict, it's set for a full-blown realignment of global power. And at the center of it all is a U.S. president who just demonstrated he will not be bound by the old rules of engagement. So where does this leave us? The first act is written in fire. The supreme leader is dead. The strait is closed. Oil markets are in freefall. And President Trump's doctrine of overwhelming, preemptive action has been executed with terrifying efficiency. The world is now holding its breath, waiting for Iran's next move and scrambling to calculate the cost. The opening credits have rolled on Operation Epic Fury. The main feature, a global economic and military crisis of untold scale, is just beginning. The world held its breath for Iran's counterpunch. It came not in a single, dramatic strike, but in a relentless, days-long barrage that has fundamentally changed the battlefield. For 72 hours, U.S. and allied positions across Iraq and Syria have been under sustained aerial and missile attack, with U.S. Central Command confirming at least 14 separate incidents targeting facilities housing American personnel. The tempo, according to a senior Pentagon official who spoke to Reuters, is unprecedented in scale and coordination since the height of the ISIS conflict. Here's the fast version of what you missed while the world focused on oil prices. Starting at approximately 0300 local time on March 12, a complex wave of Iranian-supplied drones and short-range ballistic missiles began hitting U.S. bases at Al-Assad and Erbil in Iraq, and the Conoco gas plant in eastern Syria. Initial U.S. defense systems intercepted a significant portion, but CENTCOM reports confirm at least 3 service members have been wounded and 1 hangar containing U.S. aircraft was destroyed. Satellite imagery analyzed by CNN shows significant infrastructure damage at the Rumelan landing zone in Syria. This isn't a symbolic retaliation. This is a sustained campaign designed to inflict real costs and test American resolve under fire. Now, here's the POV from the White House that changes everything about how you understand this phase. In a press briefing from the Oval Office this afternoon, President Trump addressed the attacks head-on. "They're hitting us because they're desperate. They want to come to the table," Trump stated, flanked by the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor. "I've been told they're sending back-channel messages through the Swiss right now, begging for a deal. But let me be clear, the terms aren't good enough. We are not going to reward aggression with a bad deal. The last administration did that, and look where it got us. My strategy is firm. You don't negotiate when you're getting punched, you punch back harder until they understand the new reality. Let me show you why that statement is a strategic earthquake." According to diplomatic reporting from the BBC and Swiss public broadcaster SRF, intermediaries have indeed confirmed urgent communication from Tehran in the last 48 hours. But a senior U.S. official, speaking on background to Fox News, laid out the administration's the signals from Iran's new leadership are contradictory. One faction within the Revolutionary Guards is launching attacks to appear strong, while another, likely the remnants of the political establishment, is panicking over the economic collapse and is pushing for a ceasefire. President Trump is exploiting that division. By publicly rejecting their overtures, he is calling their bluff and demonstrating that kinetic pressure alone will not force American concessions. Real talk, this is the art of the deal applied to high-stakes warfare. Trump is framing the sustained Iranian attacks not as a sign of their strength, but as proof of their weakness and their desire for a way out. He is setting the bar for negotiations impossibly high, on his terms only, while American forces absorb the blows. Analysts at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, cited in a Wall Street Journal report, note this flips the traditional script. Typically, the side taking military losses seeks a diplomatic off-ramp. The Trump doctrine, as executed here, is to interpret the enemy's pursuit of talks as a sign the pressure is working, and to double down, said analyst Mark Dubowitz. The immediate fallout is a military posture shifting from defense to active hunting. The Pentagon, in a statement released minutes after the president's remarks, announced the deployment of an additional squadron of F-35 stealth fighters to the UAE and the movement of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group to the Northern Arabian Sea. "Our response will be at a time and place of our choosing, and it will be disproportionate," the Secretary of Defense told reporters. Translation: the U.S. is preparing to escalate further, explicitly rejecting a ceasefire. So where does this leave us? The conflict has escalated from a decapitation strike to a grinding war of attrition on one front, and a brutal game of diplomatic chicken on another. Iran's new leadership is trying to balance saving face with saving their economy. President Trump has just called their raise and shoved all his chips into the center of the table, betting that American resilience and firepower will outlast Iranian resolve. The world is now watching for two things: the next, inevitable U.S. counterstrike, and whether Tehran's back-channel pleas turn into public concessions or a desperate, all-in military gamble. The question is no longer if Iran will respond to the American rebuff of talks. The question is, with Trump openly gaslighting their aggression as desperation, what catastrophic move does a cornered regime make next? Tehran, Iran, in a move that stunned diplomatic circles, Iran's new leadership has publicly denied seeking a ceasefire while simultaneously presenting what U.S. officials are calling impossible terms, a gambit that President Trump has reportedly refused to even acknowledge, doubling down on a strategy of maximum pressure. Let me show you why this isn't a breakdown in talks. This is the talk. According to a Reuters report citing 3 European diplomats, communication channels were active late Tuesday. The Iranian message, as relayed by Swiss intermediaries, contained a single, non-negotiable precondition for any discussion: a full and immediate withdrawal of all U.S. military forces from the entire Middle East before the first word is uttered. Read that again, a senior administration official told Fox News. They want a complete American retreat from the region as an opening bid. That's not a negotiating position. That is a statement of war aims. President Trump's instruction was clear: do not respond. We do not negotiate with terrorists, and we certainly don't negotiate from a position of weakness they are trying to fabricate. Real talk, this is the ultimate gaslighting play. Tehran is launching missiles and drones daily, their economy is in freefall, and their back-channel pleas are an open secret. Yet, their public-facing POV? They're the magnanimous ones offering America a way out. It's the geopolitical equivalent of a Karen demanding to see the manager after she set the store on fire. The Iranian Foreign Ministry, in a statement carried by state media IRNA on Wednesday morning, framed it as a heroic and flexible offer for peace. The statement said, "The Islamic Republic has never requested a ceasefire. We are responding to aggression, as is our right. If the Americans wish to stop the bloodshed, they know the path, end their illegitimate presence in our region. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, in a note to clients, dissected the move. This is a classic resistance framework playbook, said analyst Catherine Zimmerman. You create an unattainable public demand to maintain revolutionary credibility with your base, while hoping the private reality of your collapsing infrastructure forces the other side to offer you concessions anyway. President Trump is calling that bluff by ignoring the public theater and amplifying the private pain. The private pain is getting a very public megaphone. The Pentagon released new declassified intelligence assessments showing a 40% drop in Iranian oil exports since Operation Epic Fury began, and satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies shows severe disruptions at key petrochemical plants in Bandar Imam and Shiraz. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury Department announced a new round of sanctions targeting a shadow network of Chinese firms allegedly helping Iran skirt financial restrictions. Here's the disconnect nobody in Tehran wants to admit, said a former CIA operative familiar with Iranian leadership dynamics, speaking to CNN on condition of anonymity. The faction around the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, believes its own propaganda, that American resolve is paper-thin. They think these impossible terms will fracture the Western coalition. The Trump administration's refusal to even dignify the offer with a no proves they've completely misjudged their opponent. The on-the-ground reality is escalating by the hour. U.S. Central Command confirmed fresh strikes overnight against Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, drone manufacturing sites near Isfahan. Iranian state TV, in turn, broadcast footage of what it claimed were successful attacks on strategic American targets in northern Iraq, though the Pentagon reported only minor damage to a remote logistical outpost. So where does this leave us? At a deliberate, terrifying impasse of Trump's design. The president has effectively taken Iran's impossible terms and made them irrelevant. By refusing to negotiate, he is forcing the regime into a corner with only two real exits: back down publicly and face a catastrophic loss of credibility, or escalate into a direct, conventional confrontation they cannot win. The steadfastness isn't just about strength, it's a calculated bet that the regime's internal fractures will crack before the U.S. military's endurance does. The world is now watching for the next, inevitable kinetic response from Iran. But the more telling signal will be in the silence from their diplomatic backchannels. When the pleas stop, that's when you know they've chosen their path. Facing unrealistic demands and a president who views their aggression as a sign of desperation, will Iran's next move be a climb down or a catastrophic, all-in gamble? The clock is ticking, and the table has just been flipped. Global markets are in freefall this morning as the conflict enters a new, more dangerous phase, with Iran directly threatening the lifelines of global commerce. In a primetime NBC interview aired last night, President Donald Trump reiterated that Tehran's leadership wants a deal, desperately, but underscored that the United States will not negotiate while under threat. They know the terms. Stop the terror, open the straits. It's very simple, the president stated. His comments come as the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, signaled plans for at least 3 more weeks of intensive strikes, and Iran issued a stark new warning to neighboring Arab states. The immediate trigger for the market panic was a statement from a senior commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, Navy, carried by the Tasnim news agency. He explicitly threatened to target any port or facility in the region used to support American and Israeli aggression, naming Fujairah and Khor Fakkan in the United Arab Emirates as prime examples. These ports are critical global transshipment hubs, bypassing the already closed Strait of Hormuz. The message is clear: if we suffer, everyone suffers, a European intelligence official told Reuters on condition of anonymity. They are weaponizing global supply chains. The economic data is instantaneous and brutal. According to Bloomberg, Brent crude futures surged past $128 a barrel in early Asian trading, a 28% spike in 24 hours. The Dow Jones Industrial Average futures are pointing to an opening drop of over 800 points. Maritime tracking data from marine traffic shows at least 17 container ships and oil tankers altering course away from the Gulf of Oman, with insurance premiums for vessels in the region, known as war risk premiums, skyrocketing by 400%. Let me show you what this means for you, said commodities analyst Rachel Chen on CNBC. That oil price translates to American gas prices hitting $6.50 a gallon by next week. Every product on a container ship from Asia to Europe or the East Coast just got 30% more expensive overnight. This isn't a regional conflict anymore, it's in your wallet. The IDF's announcement, reported by the Times of Israel, outlines a sustained campaign targeting IRGC command nodes, missile stockpiles, and naval assets. We are prepared for the long haul, an unnamed senior Israeli military official was quoted as saying. The goal is to degrade their capability to project power for a generation. Pentagon officials, speaking to CNN, confirmed the U.S. is providing continuous intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance (ISR) support for these operations, with U.S. naval assets positioned to intercept any Iranian attempt to harass shipping. President Trump's NBC interview, conducted by Lester Holt, framed the escalating economic pain as a deliberate and necessary pressure tactic. They're feeling it. Their economy is collapsing. The protests are getting bigger, Trump said. They gaslight the world with these impossible demands, but the reality is they're coming to the table. We just won't have a bad deal. My administration is getting the deal America should have gotten years ago. When pressed on the global economic fallout, he was direct: sometimes you have to break a few eggs. The weakness of the past administration got us here. Strength gets us out. Analysts see a grim calculus. This is the high-stakes gamble, said Jonathan Panikoff, a former U.S. Deputy National Intelligence Officer, in an analysis for the Atlantic Council. Trump is betting that the threat to the UAE, a major U.S. partner, will finally force the Gulf Cooperation Council to openly and fully side with the U.S.-Israel campaign, politically isolating Iran completely. But if it backfires, and the UAE pressures Washington to de-escalate to save its economy, the coalition could fracture. The UAE's government has not yet issued a public response to the Iranian threat. However, diplomatic sources speaking to the BBC indicate emergency calls have been placed to Washington, Riyadh, and Beijing. China, a major consumer of Gulf hydrocarbons and a key economic lifeline for Iran, finds itself in a bind. Beijing hates instability in its energy supply routes, said Yun Sun, director of the China program at the Stimson Center. They will be privately furious at Tehran for this move, but their public opposition to U.S. hegemony limits their options. So where does this leave us? At the edge of a global recession trigger. The conflict has officially jumped the fence. It's no longer just about airstrikes and missile barrages in the Persian Gulf. Iran has just pointed a gun at the world's economic central nervous system. President Trump's strategy of maximum pressure is now facing its ultimate stress test. Can the global economy withstand the pain long enough for the regime to break? Or will the cascading crises, soaring inflation, broken supply chains, market crashes, force a retreat before the objective is achieved? The world is now watching two clocks, the IDF's 3-week campaign clock, and the far more volatile clock of the global markets. Which one runs out first? Vatican City, Pope Francis issued a dramatic global appeal for an immediate ceasefire in the Persian Gulf conflict on Sunday, calling the spiraling violence a failure of humanity that is pushing the world toward catastrophe. The plea, delivered from a window overlooking St. Peter's Square, was swiftly endorsed by the U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Joseph Donnelly, who stated the U.S. fully supports the Holy Father's campaign for peace and de-escalation. The move creates a stark, almost surreal, disconnect between the diplomatic messaging and the relentless military and economic reality on the ground. Even as the Pope spoke, the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, entered the third week of Operation Epic Fury, with Reuters reporting fresh strikes on an Iranian missile production facility near Isfahan overnight. Meanwhile, global shipping data analyzed by Bloomberg shows a near-total freeze in commercial traffic heading toward the UAE's critical ports of Fujairah and Khor Fakkan, with over 200 vessels idling or diverting course amid Iran's blockade threat. Let's be real. This is the ultimate gaslighting POV, said a former White House communications official, speaking anonymously to CNN. You have the spiritual leader of 1.3 billion Catholics, backed by America's own ambassador, calling for peace. And in the same news cycle, you have the Pentagon confirming it's feeding targeting data to the IDF for more strikes. The cognitive dissonance is off the charts. Yet, within the Trump administration, sources describe this not as confusion, but as deliberate strategic clarity. In background briefings to the Wall Street Journal, senior officials framed the Pope's intervention as a useful pressure valve, applying moral weight on Iran to capitulate, while U.S. and Israeli actions continue to apply physical and economic force. The president's strategy has always been multi-layered, one official said. The ambassador's statement is part of the campaign. It shows the world America wants peace, but only a peace that permanently ends the threat. The onus is on Tehran. The gap between the public calls for peace and the private prosecution of the campaign was laid bare in a leaked diplomatic cable, cited by the Financial Times, from a Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, emergency meeting. The cable describes the UAE's foreign minister as visibly furious, telling counterparts that the U.S. was offering sympathy but no tangible protection for its ports, and that the GCC was being asked to bear the brunt of a strategy it did not design. President Trump's response to the growing international chorus, including from G7 allies, has been characteristically direct. In a post on his social media platform Truth Social, he wrote, "The Pope is a great man, and I respect him greatly. But for years, the world prayed for peace while Iran built missiles and spread terror. Prayers are good, but strength is what gets results. We are being strong so that the peace we get lasts. Analysts see a high-wire act. Trump is betting that the spectacle of this divide, between the Vatican and the Pentagon, between public diplomacy and private war, actually works in his favor, said Corey Sheikh, Director of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, in an interview with MSNBC. It makes the U.S. look reasonable for supporting peace talks while making Iran look intransigent for not surrendering. But the risk is the entire international coalition, already strained, starts to see it as bad faith theater and fractures. The immediate fallout is economic. Despite the Pope's appeal, Brent crude oil futures surged past $112 a barrel in early Asian trading Monday, a 75% increase since the conflict began. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, in a hastily convened press conference, warned of a probable and severe global recession within 2 quarters if the Strait of Hormuz is physically closed. So, we are left with 2 parallel realities. In one, a global spiritual leader, backed by American diplomats, pleads for a ceasefire. In the other, the machinery of war grinds on, oil tankers sit frozen, and the global economy ticks toward a cliff. The question is no longer just about military timelines or market clocks. It's about which version of reality will crack first. Will the overwhelming pressure of global opinion and economic panic force a truce? Or will Trump's gamble, that you can loudly support peace while waging war, and thereby win both, prove to be a brutal new kind of strategic genius? Amidst the sacred calls for peace, the secular calculus of power continues unabated. Which will give way? The world is now staring down the barrel of a global recession, with diplomatic channels frozen and economic forecasts turning apocalyptic, as President Trump's refusal to accept anything less than total Iranian capitulation defines the conflict's final, grim chapter. Let me show you the reality. There are no back-channel talks. No secret negotiations in Oman. According to 3 diplomatic sources who spoke to Reuters on condition of anonymity, every overture from European and Gulf intermediaries has been met with a single, unwavering U.S. condition: Iran must publicly announce the permanent dismantlement of its ballistic missile program and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, before any discussion of a ceasefire begins. A senior European diplomat, cited by the Financial Times, described the U.S. posture as a demand for unconditional surrender, not a basis for diplomacy. The economic clock has officially run out. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, in a dire update to its earlier warning, now projects a 3.2% contraction in global GDP for the coming year if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, a scenario it now calls the base case. Brent crude is trading at $1.18 a barrel, and the U.S. national average for a gallon of gasoline hit $5.87 this morning, a 45% spike since the conflict began. The Federal Reserve, in an emergency statement, signaled it is powerless to combat supply-side inflation of this magnitude, with Chair Jerome Powell stating, monetary policy cannot unblock a strait. So, why is President Trump holding firm? The POV from his administration, as laid out by senior officials to CNN, is brutally simple: this is the only way. We are not going to negotiate a temporary fix that lets Iran regroup and rearm in 5 years, one official said. The economic pain is global, yes. But the alternative is a permanent sword of Damocles over the world's economy. The president's stance is to end the cycle, permanently. Analysts are now forced to analyze this not as a blunder, but as a horrific, high-stakes gamble. Trump is betting that the global economic shock, as severe as it is, will force China, India, and Europe to ultimately side with the U.S. and collectively crush the Iranian regime into submission, said Ian Bremmer, president of Eurasia Group, on MSNBC. He's treating the global economy as collateral damage in a war to permanently reorder Middle Eastern security. It's a strategy of overwhelming, deliberate force applied to the financial system. The on-the-ground military campaign continues unabated. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, confirmed its air campaign is in its final phase, targeting underground command centers near Isfahan. But the real story is the economic siege. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin announced a complete global lockout of any financial institution doing business with Iran's central bank, a move the Wall Street Journal reports has frozen an estimated $90 billion in Iranian assets overseas. Here's what nobody wants to say directly: this is the gaslighting to end all gaslighting. The world is being told to endure a preventable economic catastrophe for the promise of a future security gain. And the White House narrative is that anyone complaining about $6 gas or a collapsing stock market is a Karen who doesn't understand grand strategy. Real talk. The administration is counting on the world getting tired, broke, and blaming Tehran faster than they blame Washington. The final, chilling analysis comes from the markets themselves. The VIX Fear Index is at its highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. Shipping insurance rates for the Persian Gulf are now priced as wartime premiums, making basic commerce untenable. The forecasts have moved from grim to depression era, said Karen Carnial-Tambour, co-chief investment officer at Bridgewater Associates, in a client note reviewed by Bloomberg. We are pricing in the collapse of multilateral trade frameworks. This isn't just a regional war anymore, it's a stress test of globalization, and it is failing. The world watches, not at the negotiating table, but on trading floors and at empty gas stations, as the consequences of a conflict with no off-ramp unfold. President Trump's firm stance, prioritizing ultimate strength over immediate relief, has brought the global economy to the brink. The question is no longer about who wins the war, but what remains of the world that emerges from it. The gamble is all in. The costs are now being tallied in real time.